It's Diwali, and while the residents of Ayodhya, much like the rest of the world, are lighting up their lives, their cities, their countries, and their families and homes celebrating, the Indian community in Canada's capital have had their reasons to celebrate snatched away today. Even as Justin Trudeau's regime continues to sabotage relations with India, his rival and Canada's opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, has decided to upstage Mr. Trudeau by cancelling Diwali celebrations that were scheduled to take place at Parliament Hill, leaving the Indian community very disappointed, as you can imagine. Even worse, the organizers, the Overseas Friends of India Canada, claim they haven't even received any justification or reason behind the cancellation of Diwali celebrations. The Indian community is now demanding an apology from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his rival. But the bigger story, ladies and gentlemen, coming in from Canada today is a lot more insidious. Two senior officials from Trudeau's cabinet, his national security advisor and his deputy foreign affairs minister, have both testified in front of a parliamentary panel that they planted a leak in the Washington Post to carry out a hit job against the Indian government and one of its top ministers over his alleged involvement in hostile activities on Canadian soil. Furthermore, Canada has now also accused India's top minister, who is part of Prime Minister Modi's inner circle, of orchestrating plots against Sikh separatists, including Khalistani Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we at Mirror Now have taken a conscious call not to reveal the identity of the minister in question because we don't believe in amplifying Canada's absolutely ludicrous claims without any proof. But you must listen to the Canadians for yourself.
You can confirm then that the information about, for example, the Indian minister and his alleged involvement in these crimes in Canada, that was not released in Canada, however. Can you confirm that? That was only released in the Washington Post, pardon me.
So this is not an information we provided to the journalist.
Pardon me, it was not information you provided?
No.
Who provided that information then to the journalist? You're not sure? But that was not yourself who provided that information, was it?
We did not.
Mr. Morrison, can you comment? Did you provide that information?
The journalist called me and asked me if it was that person. I confirmed it was that person.
Oh, you confirmed. So you did.
This is a journalist who's written extensively on this topic. A journalist that has various sources. He asked me if that was one of the people, and I confirmed that it was.
Now, this admission just a few days after India expelled Canadian diplomats and withdrew its own station in Canada over the claims leveled by Justin Trudeau. It has further strained bilateral relations between the two nations. Indian government sources are, of course, rubbishing the accusations as very weak and flimsy, and have confirmed that they have been receiving this complaint from the Trudeau administration for the last 1 year. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's just put this in perspective. The Canadian Prime Minister is blinded by the red mist and continues to make relations untenable by personally dragging in senior members of the Modi cabinet in the killing of a Khalistani without any evidence. That's number one. Number two, his chief rival has now alienated the entire Indian Hindu community by refusing to celebrate Diwali with them. And then third, the man on your screens, the man who hopes to be kingmaker. His name is Jagmeet Singh. He's a former ally of Justin Trudeau. He continues to openly encourage and support Khalistani terrorists. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the clincher. One of these three men will be Canada's next Prime Minister. Question is there any hope left for salvaging India-Canada relations anytime, now or in the future? Ujjwal Dosanjh is a former health minister of Canada. He's from the Liberal Party, which is Justin Trudeau's party. He's joining me on the broadcast. Before I go to my guest, I'm going to go to him. Mr. Dosanjh, which serious-minded country, which serious-minded democracy with half a sense names the topmost minister of another country, at one point friendly, for criminal activities, gives zero proof, doesn't inform its parliament or its people or its court, but leaks the information, the name and the story of a foreign publication? Who does that? Which serious-minded country does that, Mr. Dosanjh?
Well, I mean, this was a bureaucrat who was alleged to have done that. He admitted that he did that. I don't know what has passed between the governments. I mean, Government of Canada says that they have passed on some information, some evidence. They can't pass on all the evidence, as you know, as per the law. They have to produce it in court, otherwise it would be tainted. But my view, my view would be, let's sort of get back to the basics. I mean, Canada is a serious country, so is India. And if Canada has made this accusation, even through Washington Post, there has to be something in it. You don't, I've never known Canada. I've been here since 1968. I've never known Canada to make up things. So I'm not suggesting that Mr. Shah is involved. All I'm suggesting is that there must be some evidence that Canada has before it leaked that name to Washington Post. Our diplomats, the countries have been saying, you haven't given us enough evidence. And Canada has been saying, we've given you enough evidence. I mean, that's as it is. I'm not party to any of that. I'm not privy to any of that exchange. So we have to work on the basis of what's available in the public domain.
Almost nothing is available in the public domain as far as evidence is concerned, which is why I'm asking you this question again, Mr. Dosanjh. Which country will take Canada seriously? Okay, as far as evidence over who is behind Nijjar's killing is concerned, it may be a case of he said, she said. Canada is saying we have given evidence, India says no, there is not enough evidence. that is one part of the story. But point is, how does a country that you are calling serious make serious charges against another serious country and then leaks stories to set a media narrative? How is it? I mean, which country does it? Why will anyone take Canada seriously?
I think that in terms of the Canadian public, we are quite used to seeing the evidence in court, because unlike the American system, we don't have unsealed indictments. As prosecutors, the prosecutors provide the evidence to the defense and to the defense lawyers, not to the public, and then they produce that evidence in court. That is when it becomes public. And therefore, I'm not at all surprised that Canada would not have that evidence made public, that Canada may have shared the name and some particulars with India. Of course, India says, Indians, they themselves have said, what they've given us is flimsy evidence. That's what I've read. That means Canada has given India something, and maybe not enough for India to be satisfied. And, my sense is that, look, I'm an Indian by heritage. I grew up in India, and my grandfather spent 8 years in British jails fighting for India's independence. So I love the country. I love people. I love Canada because this is home to my children and grandchildren. This is where they were born. So people like us are kind of stuck in between, in the sense that we don't have divided loyalties, but we have an understanding of both cultures and both systems. That's why I'm saying Canada can't provide the evidence in public as much as Indians would like it to provide. And if they've provided some evidence, or at least the names to each other, if Canada has said, look, Amit Shah may have been involved, then I have to say, Canada being a serious country, not an unserious country, that there has to be something. If there is smoke, there is some fire there. A country like Canada would not drop that name out of nowhere. I must confess to you that what India and Canada need is not to argue through television shows. What they need is to sit down and figure out, how do you move forward with these serious allegations and deal with them.
Mr. Dosanjh, it's all very well for you to, be a peacenik and say that both countries should sit across each other and talk. How is it possible when one country in the equation, which is Canada, is more interested in setting media narratives against India than actually trying and repairing its relationship with India? How do you expect India to talk to Canada? How is it even possible to have a decent, sensible conversation with Canada if they do things which are not very sensible? And I'm being polite here.
Countries always find ways. Countries in history always find ways of sitting at the table. Nothing is ever resolved without being at the table. Even wars are settled eventually at the table. So, I'm not, and Canada and India are not at a war, fortunately. And therefore, there is all the possibility, all the room for both countries to come together and figure their way out.
Now, how will they figure a way out, Mr. Dosanjh? My last question to you. Look at what we have lined up. In the next year, Canada will have a new prime minister. And look at all the men who are lined up. One who's on the warpath for India, Mr. Trudeau. The second, his rival, who has just cancelled Diwali celebrations. And the third, who's a known pro-Khalistani supporter, Jagmeet Singh. So if one of these three men are going to become the prime minister of Canada next year, where is the hope for any India-Canada relations to improve? This probably is the point of no return.
My sense is elections and time heals everything. So wait for an election, wait for time, things will heal themselves. Canada and India have a lot in common. They're both democracies. Of course, some Canadians say India is a flawed democracy. We know it's not perfect, nor is Canada perfect by the ultimate standards. We have to work together. We have more in common than what separates and divides us. I'm hoping that things will be resolved, hopefully soon.
Mr. Dosanjh, I don't think things will be resolved anytime soon. In fact, what we are seeing is probably a historic shift in ties between India and Canada. We have probably now entered uncharted territory. We leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much to my guest from Canada. Dr. Swasti Rao is a foreign and defense expert joining us on the broadcast. Prabhu Dayal is a former ambassador joining us on the broadcast as well. And Pratikit Pine is a geopolitical analyst. He is with us on the broadcast this evening as well. Thank you. Thank you all three of you for being here. And especially thank you because it is Choti Diwali and you've made the time for Mirror Now. So doubly appreciative of your effort. Pratikrit, I'm going to come to you. This is not going to be a very long conversation. Good evening to all of you. Pratikrit, you've just heard the former health minister of Canada, who was from Mr. Trudeau's party. I want to ask you, the gloves have been off for a while between India and Canada. But have we reached a point of no return where Canada publicly is accepting that they named India's topmost minister for the killing of a known Khalistani, which is Niger, and then leaked that name to Washington Post? Is this the point of no return?
Shreya, first of all, my best wishes of Diwali to you and the rest of the panelists. Number one, I was hearing that interview, and I must say this without making any personal comment, that if somebody doesn't know the subject, that person should not make up stories. During the foreign interference inquiry, that happened on Trudeau, Trudeau was on record stating that they were weak on intelligence, and there was no evidentiary proof that they could share with the government of India. He mentioned it, and I quote, he said, they asked to show the evidence, and at that point, it was primarily intelligence and not hard evidentiary proof that Trudeau had. Number one. Number two, he was the one who used the word called credible allegation. He was inventing new words in the English language. There is never an incident of a prime minister of a country saying that I have you can share credible proof, but not credible allegation. So the entire thing was entirely, framed up first and foremost. And look at the way they are doing it. They're gradually, in a calibrated manner, upping the ante right now, sharing inputs with the Washington Post and actually naming. Please understand, Canada is actually acting far above its paycheck. It is part of an Anglo-Saxon group called G7. It is half the G, it has its GDP is half that of India. So please let me tell you the bigger point. The Five Eyes intelligence was very concerned about a plumber called Nijjar, but its entire intelligence input could not tell Israel that the October 7 attack is going to happen. So the entire thing that is happening against India, Canada is a small pawn in the larger scheme of things that is happening. So you would see what all started right after G20 summit, when India named African Union to be included, when India was successful in coming out with a communique. Trudeau's statement against India started right at that time, right inside in India. And I must say, there is a big brother who is telling Trudeau something to be done. You know, what is the difference between the American approach and the Canadian approach? It is exactly the same, that when something hits them, it is terrorism, and if something hits somebody else, it is activism. The United States has something called an extraordinary rendition program, which we know on which they can do anything to anybody outside their territorial jurisdiction who attacks the United States. And the same Trudeau government, his father, we must remember what was done during the Kanishka Air India bombing and what was the history. So let me tell you, we would face a lot of things, because they are very upset that the war between India and China, which they anticipated, is not going to happen, and that we have a strategic autonomy which we have maintained.
Okay.
And they are gradually upping the ante. We would say, I think it has reached a point where Canada, I'm sure more will be done from India, because India is making out that enough is enough.
Okay, Dr. Swasti Rao, that's true. For years, India has pleaded that there are Khalistanis who are working and attacking India from Canadian soil. Do something about it. Yet Canada has not done anything for years. You have had floats which have depicted a former prime minister of this country being assassinated. Canada has let that pass in the name of activism. I want to ask Canada if this is activism. There is a man called Pannoon who's an American-Canadian citizen, ladies and gentlemen, who constantly was issuing threats to Air India. Do activists threaten to blow up planes? They're not called activists, they're called terrorists, right? These very terrorists blew up a plane, an Air India plane, in which 300 people were killed. It's called the Kanishka bombings. Pratikrit was just referring to it. 300 people had been killed, most of them Canadian citizens. It was done by Khalistanis, and yet you continue to support them. Dr. Rao, is this just Canadian politics playing out, or is there something more to this escalation? Because escalation it is, when you name the man you have named.
Yeah. So thank you for that question, and great to be on your show. So, well, there are a couple of things, and this is something which is very murky, because while on the one hand we all know that Canada has had a history of mollycoddling with these Khalistani elements, whether it's the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party. So it's not Trudeau alone. It's just that Trudeau's father was Prime Minister. Pierre Trudeau, when he was the Prime Minister, you had the Kanishka incident happening, and sadly, the Canadians themselves seem to have forgotten about it, because they have not really done what was required to be done, which was about a proper inquiry and then actually giving justice to the victims. They never did that. So it's very clear that there is a kind of a clutch and a hold of the Khalistani element in Canadian politics, and I think it's a completely Canadian mystery as to why these guys, if they claim to be first world countries, are not interested in solving this problem, which is actually a very serious criminal issue within their own societies, right? Now, that's the first part. So about Justin Trudeau and Justin Trudeau's dependence on these Khalistani elements, I think it's very, very clear. We've been discussing about it no end. What really got me by surprise was how the opposition leader, because, days ago, the opposition leader had actually come up with a very public rebuttal of the way Justin Trudeau had been handling this entire situation. And if you actually when you scroll down the public rebuttal, it actually said that Justin Trudeau has actually been lying, because he does not really come out with any hard evidence. He doesn't come out with the names of the MPs that he says could be involved in that so-called foreign interference, so on and so forth. And now we have a situation, look at this day, what has happened. we were discussing that perhaps after Justin Trudeau goes away, right now he has a crisis of legitimacy because of the kind of fool he has made of himself, standing in his parliament without hard evidence and calling out against India. There's another thing that I'd like to, I was listening to what you were speaking to with Mr. Dosanjh. I think there's one thing that the Canadians need to understand well. The thing is that nobody is denying that if there is hard evidence, the Indian side should respond and respond in a manner which is, rational. The problem is that they do not come up with hard evidence, and in an absence of a hard evidence and operating upon raw intelligence, it just looks very, very unconvincing for the head of a state, like a prime minister of a state, to actually go speak like that about a foreign, friendly country, and then basically be reduced to a kind of a joke in his own country. So I was of the opinion that perhaps
That
because
is
we
true.
have larger convergences, you cannot doubt, Shreya, that yes, there is the factor of a diaspora. There are 3 billion people of Indian origin out there. There is a steady trade. There are things like, for example, convergence in the larger Indo-Pacific region. The pension funds, etc., have been trying to diversify away from China. So there are a couple of convergences, out there. Now, if the opposition leader himself lands at
Trade is one
canceling
of
a
them.
Diwali event, right? I mean, a Diwali event. Look at that. How childish can you get? Okay, if you land up canceling a Diwali event
That
when
is a
you had,
childish response.
yes,
And as Dr. Rao, what was
yeah,
also childish was leaking India's top minister's name to Washington Post.
true,
That's also
true.
a
So I was
childish
just,
move, Prabhu Dayal. Conducting diplomacy. I'm just getting in Prabhu Dayal as well. Prabhu
sure.
Dayal conducting diplomacy via leaks to newspapers, and that too not Canadian newspapers, but to American newspapers. Is Canada not at all interested in maintaining any sort of ties with India? Look, I understand the maximum chunk of students who go to Canada for higher studies, 40% of them are Indians. Our trade with Canada is huge. The fact also is that yes, there are 8 lakh Sikhs in Canada, the largest diaspora outside of Punjab, but the diaspora, Indian diaspora, is way more diverse. Where is this love, such deep love for Khalistanis coming that you want to completely wreck your relations with a country that you've been cordial with for a very long time?
Well, first of all, let me say that you were absolutely correct in saying that Justin Trudeau has taken the relationship with India into uncharted waters. And that we might have reached a point of no return, because as you say, all the 3 main candidates who appear to be in the run for the prime ministership are hostile now to India. There was a lot of hope that if there was a conservative government, then it would try to reverse the damage. But as per present indications, because of the cancellation of the Diwali function, even that seems an unlikely possibility. So, in other words, my assessment is that Justin Trudeau has destroyed India-Canada relations because of his childish, in fact, juvenile, short-sighted, and immature vote bank politics. I think that India-Canada relations have now sunk very low and are hitting rock bottom, especially after these allegations, this news has surfaced that Canada's national security advisor and the deputy foreign minister had leaked some information to the Washington Post alleging that an Indian minister was behind the assassination of Niger and the targeting of Sikhs in Canada. Now, let me mention, this planting of the story was not done accidentally. It was done deliberately. And it was done because they wanted to tarnish the image of the government of India. The result is that because of what I call these juvenile policies, the relationship has sunk to an all-time low, and I don't think it is going to be at all easy to rescue it from where it has fallen. Mr. Ujjal Dosanjh said that the 2 sides have been friends and they can sit across the table and sort out these differences. After all, India and Canada are not at war. But what is happening is as bad as war. This is a war of sentiment. They've played with the image of the government of India and they've tried to damage this image. Let me also mention that Justin Trudeau has made Canada a hotbed of Khalistani politics directed against India. Let me also say that Sikhs are among the most loyal and patriotic sections of India's society. However, there are a handful of exceptions who are extremists and who have carried out terrorist activities here within India as also in Canada. And what has happened is that many of these extremists have fled to Canada with the help and connivance of the Canadian authorities. They have been given visas on one pretext or the other.
Okay.
And in Canada, they have been given shelter, they have been promoted, and their activities, which are directed against India, have been encouraged by Justin Trudeau's government.
Pratikrit Pain, which brings me to an interesting question and something I just noticed or thought about when I heard the ambassador speak. We are now accusing Canada of what we once accused Pakistan of, harboring terrorists. That is where the relationship is now.
Yeah, so Shreya, we should call them Canadian terrorists and American terrorists instead of calling them Khalistani because they have Canadian passports. And that is exactly what Canada has reduced itself to. And we must also understand one thing. It is highly unlikely that Canadian government is doing it for just a few 100,000 votes. It is not so. There is a far, far deeper conspiracy going on. And you would see that the calibrated approach, as I mentioned, is going to go up. They will do far more as and when they see that a country like India, which has created this voice of global South, which is actually leading this global South, which is having this strategic autonomy, which is hitting them, and they will keep on doing it. So, let me tell you one thing. The entire Northern American this cabal has always promoted secessionism in other countries in the name of activism. It is not something new, and that is one of the reasons why you see after the Arab Spring that happened, many of the Middle Eastern Arab monarchs are distancing themselves from the Americans. Because of this, because of what they promote in the name of freedom of speech, in the name of dissent, is nothing but armed violence. Look at this. Indian government gave evidence of Canadian Border Service Agency employee. That person was involved in the killing of a Shaurya Chakra winner in Punjab whose name was Balwinder Singh Sandhu. And where is it? And let me tell you, Canada has become a de facto Pakistan base, and all is happening with the blessing of their big brother, which is just below them geographically. So there is absolutely no difference between the Americans and the Canadians.
Dr. Swasti Rao, do you second what Pratikrit is saying? That it's not just Canada. Canada is shooting its missiles in the dark because it has the backing of the US. And it is at the US's prodding that perhaps Canada is doing what it is doing. Do you believe that as well?
Well, Shreya, it is. I mean, I know this is a very popular kind of an understanding about how Canada is shooting above its weight and why is it and how is it being made possible. But frankly, if you really see how geopolitics has changed, I see very little evidence of why the US would do it. Because if the US is serious about focusing on Indo-Pacific and all the other if you look at the last 1 decade and all the different foundational agreements, all the different change in their in their policies and their strategic trade authorization, every single thing, and regardless of which administration has been in place, right? If you look at that carefully, all the recent developments with respect to technological innovation, all of that basically show that if the US pivot in Indo-Pacific towards Indo-Pacific has to work out, has to have any success, it has to really be focused on an empowered India. So this is something which is very counterintuitive, okay, if you look at how the US pivot to Indo-Pacific has worked. And that is why I also mentioned that the Five Eyes themselves, if you look at the declassified papers from Trump era in 2019, there was an Adam Schiff committee that actually said that if the Five Eyes, considering that the Western pivot, as in especially the US under Trump administration, had shifted its focus, from CENTCOM to PACOM and renamed PACOM as Pacific Command and as Indo-Pacific Command, they said that they have to support the in the US pivot to Indo-Pacific and engage in more cooperation with three specific countries, the report said, and the three specific countries were India, Japan, and South Korea. Okay. So, looking at it from that perspective, we know that none of this is going to work if the focus on India, because of our geographical location in Indian Ocean, is compromised. So, then it would be very counterproductive for what the US has been doing. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, with respect to intelligence, I think there's another thing that doesn't really catch a lot of attention when we are discussing that aspect, is that, if you really understand how the Canadian intelligence agencies work, please note that the Canadians do not have independent external intelligence agencies, okay? So what they have is that they have internal intelligence, but they don't have, in a similar fashion, they don't have external intelligence capabilities, and they are rather dependent on other partners, which is the Five Eyes partners. And that is why the kind of evidence that they've been furnishing is basically a raw kind of information, like a raw input, because if you look at the nature of how those intelligence inputs are gathered, they are gathered about everything and anything. And then it is incumbent upon that particular party to actually then translate it into hard evidence, and precisely the kind of a problem that India has. Because let's remember, if you go by what the Indian government has said and not the commentariat, okay, if you go by what the Indian government has said, the Indian government has been forthcoming about the allegations made by the US because the evidence presented was hard, okay? On the contrary, we have had problems, with Canada from the go, because the manner in which it was presented, and two, the sheer quality of the thing which was being referred to as evidence, which was not evidence but a raw intelligence input, okay, which was not yet precipitated in the form of any intelligence. So those are things which are very technical, and going by what the Indian, I have not seen the Indian government has.
I'll wait and watch.
Gone ahead and endorse these theories. And like I said, if you really ask me as an expert, I would say that this sounds very counterproductive, because then how on earth is the US pivot to Indo-Pacific
so we'll wait and watch.
It will never work. Yes.
Dr. Rao, we'll have to just wait and watch.
Yes.
We'll just have to now wait and watch if America does back Canada on the latest claims that they have made about India's topmost minister being involved in the killing of Nijjar and orchestrating criminal activities on Canadian soil. We'll wait and see what the Americans say, because that will be a giveaway. But one thing can be, I think, very conclusively said this evening, that India and Canada ties have entered uncharted territory. We don't know where it's going from here on. Dr. Rao, thank you very much for joining us. Good to have you. Prabhu Dayal, thank you for your perspective. And Pratikit Pine, always good to have you on the show. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on Choti Diwali, and a very happy Diwali to all of you.